Hello, Lou.
Good morning. We're live on air, Mr. Devlin.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, great that you've come on. How are things? I've just announced that it's on Mr. Savile's birthday here on Halloween, 90 today.
Yes, indeed, he would have been. Busy.
Been, yeah.
Lots going on. Been promoting the book all year, so trying to juggle that with keeping the wolves from the door and paying the bills and all that, as we all do. So busy times.
Yeah. So, Mark, let's start about your early life. You've obviously got a radio show on the FM over in Oxford on Radio Destiny, is it?
Yeah, I do a normal, in inverted commas, radio show. So not all this truth and conspiracy stuff. Is actually a regular music radio show on an FM station in Oxford. So it just reminds me that when I'm not doing all this truth business, I am first and foremost a DJ, and I've been for the last 26 years. Sometimes I do forget that. How did you
get started with all that, Mark?
As a DJ or as a truth researcher?
No, we'll start with the music first and how you ended up coming to where you are now.
Okay, well, I'm someone that's always enjoyed music, and I got into it from a very young age. I bought my first record when I was 5, saved together my pennies, my pocket money, and went and bought a copy of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Wow.
When it was around first time. So from that point on, I was just into pop music, whatever was in the charts. My mum always had the radio on around the house, so that just got me an ear for music. And in my teenage years, I fine-tuned my tastes and got into black music, basically. So soul, funk, hip-hop, R&B, soulful house, that sort of stuff, early dance music. Yeah. And at that point, I realised that I wanted to become a DJ because I was so enthusiastic about all this music. I wanted to communicate that to other people. And it wasn't easy. It took some time, but I did eventually establish myself as a DJ on both radio and in clubs. And so that was my job for a good number of years. It was actually my main living for 20 years.
Was that the start of the early rave scene, like the late 80s? Would all that have kicked off for you, Mark?
Yeah, it was. My enthusiasm for all that music was sparked in the sort of mid to late 80s, and I managed to get myself established in 1990. So I got a job on a radio station in 1990. So it was from that point forward that I've been playing out, really.
Right. So what triggered you? What opened your eyes to that something isn't right in this world? What was the defining moment?
Well, it took me until 2010 to figure it out, so it's still relatively recent. It's only 6 years. Yeah. And I went 20 years as a DJ, just playing music and doing parties and not really giving any thought to the fact that there could be something more and something beneath the surface. And what it was really was, as well as being someone that's always loved music, I'm also someone that has tended to ask big questions in life. So I've always reflected on questions like, what is this place? What are we doing here? What are we? Who are we? Yeah. Where are we going? What happens after death? These sort of questions. You know, it really surprises me to find that there are people that don't muse on these big questions. You know, can there really be people that go through an entire lifetime without thinking about these things? But apparently there are. Apparently there are, because most people just seem content to talk about the football and the X Factor and what's for dinner tonight, you know. Yeah. But I'm someone that always asks those big questions, and I was helped on my way by my dad, because my dad has always been a deep thinker, and he's someone that's not been afraid to kind of step outside the box, you know, and he kind of encouraged me to do the same. So he got me into reading a whole bunch of books, and it was really the books of David Icke, to be honest, which I would say eventually woke me up, because I was reading his Human Race Get Off Your Knees in 2010, and there was just something about reading that book and absorbing that information at that time that made everything click for me. And it's as if everything suddenly made sense, and the veil had been lifted, and I could see this world for what it really was, breaking through the illusion and seeing all the stuff that goes on in the background. And so that sparked questions of, you know, what is consciousness? What is reality? What is spirituality? And it just sent me off down a path of researching all that stuff. And I'm sure it's an experience that many listeners can relate to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly can. I mean, I got to a path where I had my awakening, and it started taking me to have a look, and I looked into meditation and the oneness of things. But since then, I'm now being pulled in another direction, and a lot of my friends were pulled in this. I went down the spiritual route thoughts are energy, and the universe has got, gratitude to the universe. But the way I'm seeing things now, you could completely disagree with me. I mean, I followed a lot of Mark Passio's work, Michael Tazarian, Wayne Dwyer, Dr. Dwayne Dyer, and I'm now pushing that I'm seeing so much evil, so much darkness, especially with regards to the satanic kind of stuff, the stuff relating to Jimmy Savile. I'm now looking, well, hang on a minute. I mean, I was always in a belief that the Bible was there as a tool to control people. But the more, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting a bit older, I'm looking at the writings within the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I'm now I'm at this stage now where I'm a little bit confused, because I'm down with the spirituality and we are one, but I'm very much being drawn towards Jesus at the moment. I don't know if you got there yet, but that's kind of at a stage where I am at the moment, Mark. I don't know how you feel about that.
Right. Well, I've been through so many different sort of belief systems in my life. So I went to C of E schools, Church of England, and they taught all about Jesus and God, and we were taught to look at the Bible and accept it as truth. And then I kind of rebelled against that in my teenage years. I thought, this is all BS. This makes no sense. This is all rubbish. And it didn't have any bearing on my life. And then I went through a phase around about 1990 when I first became a DJ, where I started to feel differently about things. And I really think I was tapping into some kind of vibrational change that was happening at that time, because a lot of people I speak to seem to have been experiencing something similar around about 1990. And because I didn't know what was happening to me and I was seeking answers, I allowed myself to get coerced and manipulated into an evangelical Christian church. And I went there for 4 years, and it was heavy indoctrination. And I never really felt comfortable with it all, because I could see a lot of hypocrisy in the people that went to the church. They were preaching one thing but not living it in their lives.
Absolutely.
And also it seemed a bit like the Freemasons, because there were different generations of the same family that were being brought through in the senior positions in the church, and that didn't seem quite right to me. So I felt like an insider there, and I left after 4 years being quite disillusioned with the whole thing. And it caused me to become an atheist. So for many, many years, I was just of the view that, no, there's no God, there's no spirituality, it's all fake, it's all phony, it's all man-made. And it was round about, my awakening in 2010, where I came to an understanding that actually, yes, there is a divine power, there is source consciousness, and some people choose to call it God, but it's absolutely real, and we're all expressions of it. So I've been through all these different phases, and I think it was necessary for me to go through them so that I could assimilate it all and arrive at the point that I'm at now. So when it comes to the character of Jesus, I tend to think that Jesus is symbolic and a personification of the idea of Christ consciousness, which is, higher raised consciousness, connectedness with source. And he is presented to us in the Bible as an example of this process that is available to us to go through if we choose to with our free will.
He's like the original truther. That's how I'm kind of seeing it. He was here to give a message that we are more than what we believe we are. I don't know. I'm very confused at the moment where I am at the moment, Mark. So.
Well, it is confusing. But I've heard a lot of claims that Jesus never actually existed as a historical figure. And of course, for every claim that he didn't, somebody else pipes up with some apparent evidence that he did. So it does get very confusing. But I do tend to be of the view that he appears to us in the Bible by way of a teaching and by way of guidance and communicating that idea of Christ consciousness, connectedness with source, which is the antithesis to Satanism, of course. And Satanism is not what most people think it is. It's nothing to do with this demonic entity called the devil. It's all to do with service to self as opposed to service to creation. And it's basically all about selfishness. Me, what suits me right now, today, and to hell with everyone else. And that is the mindset that most people in the world are in, if we're honest.
Absolutely.
We've been conditioned, most of us, to live a satanic lifestyle, which absolutely suits the ruling elite class, of course, to have us all in that spiritual state, cut off from higher consciousness, and that is what is represented by figures such as Jesus in my book, and that's what we need to get back to. You don't need to call yourself a Christian, you don't need to be a religious fundamentalist.
No.
You know, it is there as a spiritual state that we can all connect with if we choose to through our free will.
Yeah, and it all, as Mark Passio, as he says, you know, you've got to start living your own truth, and everything. You can't expect to see change in this world if you're not prepared to start with that yourself.
Absolutely.
And I'm in complete agreement. Now, let's talk about the book. Is it your second book?
It is, yeah. I put a book out in 2007 called Tales from the Flip Side, and that was all about my DJ days, and it was a collection of anecdotes and witty stories about stuff that happened to me as a DJ. So, you know, anyone that's into DJing and club life and music and stuff might enjoy that as a humorous kind of read, but it's not what you'd call a conscious read, because I was not on this path back then. So I was completely asleep and I was completely in the system, you know, so there's no words of wisdom in there.
No.
But my second book is very different, Musical Truth, which came out earlier this year. That brings together everything I've come to understand about how the corporate music industry is being used for mind control, social engineering, and how it fits into the bigger picture of what's going on in the world. So the music industry plays its part in the overall picture of trying to spiritually enslave humanity, basically.
Let's touch on this now then, Mark. What have you discovered? We know MK Ultra was very prominent back in the 70s and 80s. And we know music is used as a tool by the elite to entrap us and the young generation. But what with regards to mind control and current popular music?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit in the middle of that question.
Just your findings on mind control in the current state of the music industry at the moment.
Yeah, well, it is kind of apt that we're doing this show today, being Halloween, because as you've mentioned, it would have been the 90th birthday of the entity Jimmy Savile. And he died 5 years ago and 2 days today. And Jimmy Savile, in many ways, is representative of stuff that goes on in the industry. He's kind of a figurehead for so much of this nefarious stuff when you get beneath the glossy surface. And people will be horrified to hear this, but he really is only the tip of the iceberg, because everywhere you look, when you do the digging, you find paedophilia, you find satanic ritual abuse, you find mind control, you find connections into the world of military intelligence and the world of the elites, so-called. And you know, it's a very dark story. Let me just read this little quote from the book, because I think it really puts things into perspective. It's just a brief paragraph from the Coleman Experience blog site from November 2014. And I started one of my chapters with this. And the quote goes, "If you thought for 1 minute that Britain is really as it appears to be, you're very sadly mistaken. Beneath the pomp and pageantry lies a network of paedophilic depravity so vile and despicable it literally beggars belief. Don't be fooled into thinking Jimmy Savile was an isolated case either. He wasn't." And I think that really sums things up. So in the early chapters of the book, I'm looking at the connections between Savile and many of the other prominent musicians of the time. There's connections between many of those going back into the world of military intelligence, particularly MI5, MI6, and when you get over to the American side of the story, connections into the CIA and the FBI. Then you have, as I mentioned, paedophile rings everywhere, such as the Elm Guest House and the Dolphin Square and all these other things, not to mention the BBC paedophile ring, which is absolutely real as well. And it wasn't just Jimmy Savile there either. And, you know, all these other things. And I've made the point in so many of the public talks that I've done around the book this year that if the music industry was really all about entertainment and fun, having a bit of a laugh, forgetting all your worries and listening to some great music, then why do you find all these things time and time again, decade after decade, cropping up in this story? So it's a very deep interconnected web with loads of synchronistic overlaps between these different things. But I've done my best to break down in the book how it all ties together. So specifically with mind control, what you have in the entertainment industry is divisions of MK Ultra the notorious CIA program. And in its broadest sense, that was all about the mind controlling of the general public. And it was done in many ways. So as well as using that program for Manchurian candidate style assassins, such as, you know, Mark David Chapman and Sirhan Sirhan and John Hinckley Jr. and people like that, it was also all about affecting culture and affecting morals and the degradation of morality in culture. And that played out big time in the 1960s when you had the counterculture hippie scene, which was very much subverted and taken over by the CIA and various other think tanks and organisations. That's when LSD arrived on the scene and magic mushrooms, and you had all these other social changes happening at the time. And the powers that be absolutely did a number on the generation of young people in those times. And it was all a part of the very broad MK programme. Another very specific way in which it plays out in the music industry is when you get down to the divisions known as monarch programming, and also to a lesser extent beta programming, sex kitten programming. And this is where you can see artists such as, I mean, a couple of good examples have to be Britney Spears and Miley Cyrus.
Christ, yeah.
And there would be many others. I would suggest that Kanye West is very much a product of mind control. I would suggest that Michael Jackson was the same way. I would suggest that the Beatles were involved in all of that as well back in the day, and many, many other artists. And monarch programming is trauma-based mind control. And this is where individuals are subjected to horrific levels of trauma, which causes them to dissociate from reality and for their minds to shatter into different programmable personalities. And the handlers and the controllers then program these individuals with these different personas and send them out there into the public to do their thing. And these alters, these different personas, can be triggered at will by particular, you know, phrases or pieces of music or sounds or colours or patterns, and then you find a different personality clicking into place and replacing the front altar of these individuals. The reason they do it is because they want absolute control over their key assets, their chosen ones. So that's why you get so many prominent Hollywood actors and so many well-known pop stars that would appear to be subject to this programming, because they want them absolutely on script. They want them basically as flesh robots, automatons that will respond to commands and do what they're told to do. They don't want these individuals thinking for themselves and expressing themselves creatively and individually. And a lot of it ties into bloodlines as well, families. And this is very key to a lot of the stuff that I'm looking into now. Lifetime actors, you know, individuals that are given to us in recognisable positions in culture and in the public spotlight, and they appear to be one thing. So we think of them as a pop star or an actor or a politician or a business leader. But in actual fact, their real work lies beneath that public persona, and what they're really doing is affecting culture, affecting people's perceptions of life and morality and values, and they're having a subliminal effect on the minds of the general public without them realising that they're doing it. And key to it often, as I say, is the family bloodlines that these people come out of, because when you trace some of the genealogy, it goes back generations, and you find that different generations of the same family are put to use in these different roles. So they like to keep it within these close circles in so many cases, and mind control and satanic ritual abuse going down the generations is never far from the surface.
No. I mean, we can think back to when Britney Spears, I mean, this is clearly when the handler lost control and she was deprogrammed for a very short second when she had the shaving off the hair incident and it all being filmed. And then in steps father to take control. Handler lost control of her. Father stepped back into that controlling thing, and then boom, she's back into this little MK Ultra puppet. But for the time that was quite a clear case of like she'd broken free from the program, she'd broken free from the handler, she'd got away, she'd shaved off all the head, and this was like a call for help. But then obviously in steps father, takes back control, and boom, she's back to little Britney Spears. Talking of subliminal, I don't know if you ever saw the video EXO by Beyonce.
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned it.
Have you seen that subliminal? The subliminal with the devil. I mean, I my 12-year-old, she was 12 or 13 at the time, she phoned me up and went, "Mummy, the devil's real, you were right." You know, and it like literally blink and you'd miss it. I mean, there's so many.
Well, there are, you know,
subliminal messages with some of the biggest pop stars, and the kids today, they don't realise what they're doing when they're worshipping these idols of what these so-called idols are really all about.
Yeah. That's a great example of a subliminal. Beyonce XO, you know, why is there an image of a demonic entity like an Archon spliced into that video for a split second? So it goes straight in the subconscious mind. It's so quick that the conscious mind doesn't catch it, but that doesn't mean it's not having an effect on the people that see it. And the target market for Beyonce, let's face it, and Rihanna and, you know, artists like that are young girls of sort of 8 to 15 years of age, I guess, and you know, maybe upwards. But they're absorbing all this stuff. There's another subliminal similar to that with a demonic entity in it in a Robin Thicke video, "Get Her Back."
Oh,
you know,
really?
It's got nothing to do with the song whatsoever, and there's no discernible reason for it to be in the video, but it's there. And you get it in Rihanna videos and stuff as well. So kids will be having nightmares about this stuff because they've absorbed these horrific images, but they've got no recollection of it. And the people that are making these videos absolutely know what they're doing. They're specifically putting this stuff in to have that kind of mind controlling effect, and it's always young people that they're after. So all these pop stars are aimed at basically kids and young teenagers, and it's always the youthful generation because they're so easy to mind control. And I've made this point in a couple of recent interviews. If you watch any kind of TV show or live stage show involving Derren Brown, who is a very interesting, very enigmatic character. Lots to know about him. I would love to get an interview with Derren Brown, and I've reached out to his people to ask for one, but they've knocked me back, not surprisingly. I don't think this is one for Derren, they said. But, you watch any one of his shows, and the sort of audience that he attracts is always young people. So it's students and people in their 20s, generally. You know, there's a few people older than that, but the core of the audience will be people in their 20s. They seem to love his act, and he always goes for them. So whenever he's looking for a subject for one of his stunts on TV, he'll always pick some young dude or dudette, you know. You'll never see him pick somebody in their 40s, because when you've got to that stage in life, you've learned a bit about, or you should have done, you've learned a bit about what to look out for, and you've learned a few lessons in life, and you're not as malleable as you are when you're young. But your mind is a blank canvas when you're a young person, and you've not yet learned a lot of these life lessons. So he's always after them, and they're always in the crosshairs. And it was the same thing with the hippie counterculture scene of the 1960s. As I said, all the people that were in the crosshairs of the CIA with everything they were doing back in those days were young people in their late teens and early 20s. And there's this famous meeting which David Icke talks about a lot, and I do mention it in the book. People might be familiar with it. There was a meeting in 1969 of Planned Parenthood, which was a division of the eugenics scene, basically the Rockefeller Foundation. And there was a paediatrician by the name of Dr. Richard Day. And in this meeting in March 1969 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he outlined all the social changes that were due to take place in the decades ahead. And it was basically the blueprint for the New World Order that we've seen being rolled out over these past few decades. So he talked about all the things that were going to come to pass. And there was a section of it where he specifically spoke about the entertainment industry. And he said, music is going to get worse. It's going to be degrading. It's going to sound awful. The lyrics are just going to get more and more debased. And it's young people that are going to be affected by this. And he made a comment along the lines of, don't worry about the older generation. It doesn't matter what they think because they're done. Basically, they're spent. You know, in a few decades, they'll have died out. All their values will have died out with them. And we're after the young people so that we can cultivate these value systems and these perceptions in their minds and bring them through to adulthood. And they're the important ones. So he made the point that it's always the young people you target. Don't worry about anyone 40 plus. Because they'll just be seen as grizzled, past it, irrelevant old sods.
Get the youngsters in, the influential, and get in their heads.
Exactly.
Right, we're going to have a little 3-minute breather, and we're going to have some decent music now. And when I asked you what you like, you want to give me some truth by John Lennon.
Well, it says it all, yeah.
It does, exactly. So if you just mute your mic, I'm going to play this out and we'll be back in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Today with Mark Devlin. He's a DJ, radio presenter, and now author, and we are discussing MK Ultra and mind control within the music industry and the current state of the nation. Your thoughts on John Lennon, Mark, because there's a lot of things surrounding John Lennon, and he was part of the establishment. Then you got Yoko Ono was brought in to basically get in his head. What are your thoughts with the whole Beatles and John Lennon?
Oh boy, well, I'd like to write a book on all of that because there's so much to say about the Beatles alone, and you could probably write an entire book on John Lennon. He's such a fascinating character. Yeah. And you were talking earlier about being confused and not knowing how to assimilate all the information. When it comes to Lennon, that's certainly the way I feel about him, because you can listen to his solo music from the 1970s. Tracks such as Gimme Some Truth and Instant Karma and Mind Games and Working Class Hero and all these great tracks he was putting out in the 70s. And he came across as an individual that was absolutely consciously awakened, and he'd worked out what this matrix control system was all about, and he was imparting all these words of wisdom coming from a higher spiritual place. But you contrast that with his role in the Beatles, and when you really get down to the research, you come to understand that the Beatles were almost certainly a product of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. They were a product of military intelligence. They were put out there to serve a specific agenda. Their music changed big time in 1966 with the replacement of Paul McCartney, and they were out there to do a job for their handlers and their controllers. And Lennon was very much a part of that, and he would appear to have been a willing participant in that overall process. There's a couple of good websites that people might want to take a look at. One is called What's Wrong with the Beatles. It's written from a Christian perspective, which might put a lot of people off, but there's still some great information there. And it goes into a lot of the imagery, the kind of Masonic imagery and the dark occult stuff that went into the Beatles' music and their record sleeves and things like that. And there's another website called Occult Beatles, and that's kind of more of the same. So Lennon was very much down with that program during the 1960s, and there's rumours that he was bisexual as well. There's some pictures that sort of hint at homosexuality, and all sorts of stuff was going on, and definitely Satanism. But he seems to have changed. Something seems to have happened to him. There are some that claim that he too was replaced, just like Paul McCartney. I'm not sure.
See, I wanted to bring up that because I've looked at the Winged Beetle and some of the evidence, and I'm in no doubt that Paul McCartney was replaced.
Oh, absolutely.
It's completely obvious. But you mentioned this to some hardcore Beatles fan, and she's just talking more nonsense. And seriously, guys, if you want to look, where else did you find evidence? I mean, I've seen that documentary Winged Beatles so many times, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club album, the album, the front cover, so much. There's so many clues. Where else did you go and find out more info on all this, Mark?
Well, let me just get onto that in depth in a second. With regards to Lennon, I mean, a lot of people think that the arrival of Yoko Ono on the scene was a turning point for him, and it certainly seems to be, because he started making all these anti-establishment statements and making tracks like Give Peace a Chance and stuff like that after he'd met Yoko. So you might think that she had a positive effect on him in terms of seemingly waking him up out of his mind-controlled state and getting him on this conscious path. But there are equally a large number of people that claim that she was his mind-control handler. And she's got quite a dubious background herself. She comes from a long-standing banking dynasty in Japan, and she's related genealogically to the Emperor of Japan. So once again, we have important bloodline links here. And, she was a mental institute patient herself, and you listen to her contribution to the Double Fantasy album, which purports to be music but is in fact just horrific noise, and she comes across as someone that's not too well, so you've got to ask, how did she come to be such an integral part of John Lennon's life? It just becomes very confusing. Nothing is easy to discern. But when you get to the replacement of Paul McCartney, if anyone reads my
Someone didn't like you talking about that.
Absolutely. I think we just lost the line.
No, you're back now. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, we're moving on to Paul McCartney.
Yeah, I just want to say hi to the fellas at GCHQ, and I hope the donuts are tasting good.
Yes, it usually happens at about 5 to 11, so they've let you off quite well, actually. You managed 30-odd minutes. So.
They've got an extended tea break this morning.
Yeah, let's talk Paul McCartney.
Yeah, Paul McCartney. So anyone that reads the book will see that there's a chapter on this subject, and it's 15,000 words. It's the largest chapter in the book. And when I wrote the book, I was a bit on the fence about it. I mean, I knew what I thought. I believed that McCartney had been replaced. But because I couldn't absolutely prove it, what I did was present all the evidence to suggest that a switch took place and leave readers to make up their own minds. If I was writing that book today, I would come right out and say that the person we think of in the world today as Paul McCartney is not the original James Paul McCartney. It is an individual by the name of William Shepherd, nicknamed Billy Shears. And he was brought in to replace the original McCartney, who died in 1966, and he's been playing the part of him ever since. There is absolutely no doubt about it now. All doubt has been removed in my mind. Many other researchers agree with me on it, and people can have any amount of evidence and proof that this switch took place that they want, because it's all out there. The Beatles had been placing clues, letting people know in a cryptic kind of underhand way that McCartney had been replaced, right the way through from 1966. There are hundreds and hundreds of clues in the form of backmasked lyrics in Beatles tracks.
Strawberry Fields Forever. And
yeah, I Buried Paul at the end of Strawberry Fields. Turn Me On Dead Man in Revolution Number 9 when it's reversed. So many other references to Paul having died and been in a car crash, which is supposed to have happened on September 11th, interesting date, 1966. Interesting year. It's all about the numbers. You come to realise that the Beatles were steeped in Freemasonry.
Totally.
And mystery school occult practices. Everything was ritual. And it would appear that the original Paul McCartney was taken out in some kind of ritual. People will be horrified to hear that, but if you're just going to dismiss it because it doesn't sound right and you've not looked at any of the evidence, then you're doing yourself and your intelligence a disservice. Mm-hmm. You need to look at what is being presented to you and the opportunities that we have to know the truth about this situation. Because people ask, what does it really matter if McCartney was replaced? Of course it matters. If we're talking about one of the most famous people on earth that can be switched and replaced right under our bloody noses, and nobody seems to notice, that is a pretty major deal for me. And if there are organisations that can pull that off and are prepared to do it, and there's that level of deception and duplicity in the world...
And that's back then, Mark.
Yeah,
What they can achieve now.
Then what else have we been lied to about all this time? So I've got a podcast coming out any day now. I'm probably going to post it tomorrow, actually, with a guy called Mike Williams, who's known as Sage of Quay. And he's a US radio show host and writer and researcher. And he's looked into this book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And it purports to be a confessional autobiography from this guy, William Shepherd, who was commissioned to take the place of Paul McCartney. So he's basically spilling the beans and telling you how it was done. But there's a certain level of fiction which has been put in there to embellish the story, because if he was to go on the public record and say, I've been taking the place of a dead man for the last 50 years, that is fraud on such a level it can't even be contemplated. And the legal ramifications of that would be so intense that it just boggles the mind. So what he's had to do is present this book as a novel and say it's a work of historical fiction and mix up a few little fictional embellishments with the real truth of what took place. But when you read that book, the level of inside knowledge of stuff that was going on in the Beatles, the level of inside knowledge of Freemasonic fraternities and the world of the dark occult, Satanism, and all the stuff that went into Beatles lyrics is so heavy that it can only have come from somebody that was a part of that inner circle, if you're being honest with yourself when you read it. So Mike is coming on my podcast to do a 2-hour talk about this, which, as I say, will be posted any day now. And then you've got the Winged Beetle documentary, which is another great summary of all the clues that have been presented to us over the years. And this is the important thing, because why do we get all these little cryptic symbolic clues given to us all the time. Why do we have predictive programming? So every time there's a major false flag terror event, there would have been some depiction of it in a TV show or a movie or a pop video in the years leading up to it. Time and time again. Why is that done? It's done because the occult priest class that we have running these institutions, as part of their religious belief systems, have to let us know what they're doing. It's revelation of the method. But they don't come right out and tell us. So they don't give a statement to the conscious mind and say, on such and such a date, we're going to blow up 50 people and, murder them. Yeah. But they will give you an opportunity to know subconsciously. So they place symbolism in all these works of popular culture because symbolism is the language of the subconscious mind. They're communicating the truth to the subconscious mind and lying to the conscious mind. So you ask them about it straight, blatantly, and they'll lie. But as far as they're concerned, they have told you the truth because they've done it in encoded symbolic form aimed at the subconscious mind. And it's down to us, as they see it, to interpret these clues and interpret these symbols and make sense of the situation. So there's always the opportunity to know. It's just the will has to be there. The will has to be there on the part of each individual to discover the truth. And if the will is there, the opportunity to know is there. And they feel that by communicating what they've done or what they plan to do to us in this way, they've removed any kind of karma, consequential payback from themselves by shifting the burden onto us. So when we've been told what they're going to do and we don't have any objection to it and we don't say we're not happy with this, the emphasis and the onus is on us and off of them as they see it. Yeah. Very, very important tenet.
Yeah. Mark, we've only got a few minutes left. I just want to talk to you about the upcoming American election and the latest batch of Mrs. Hillary Clinton's email scandal. It's come out. I think you know both got a very good mutual friend, Ian Crane. I think he's released today the new batch that have come out, where she's basically saying about funding ISIS. What are your thoughts on this election and what should be going on with Hillary Clinton? Should she be in jail?
Well, clearly she should. But then she should probably take every other US politician with her if we're going to get specific about their activities and what they represent. To be honest, I've not been paying too much attention to the fine detail of it because the whole thing just completely turns me off. I just see it as a dog and pony show. It's just a complete farce, Look at the choice. Americans are told that they live in a democracy and that they're free. And yet these are the two candidates that they have to choose from. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That's your choice? That's the extent of it.
That's the best you can get, yeah.
People think they're free. It's quite clear that America is a dictatorship. The UK is a dictatorship. We don't have free choice. These people are served up to us. And again, when you go digging into the family backgrounds, because it's very important behind many of these people, you find interesting links, I think it's 42 of the last 44 US presidents have all shared a common ancestor going back into English royalty. Barack Obama was linked to George W. Bush. David Cameron is a cousin of the Queen. You find these links time and time again, that the royal family are said to be linked to Vlad the Impaler of Transylvania. So
that's right.
None of these people get there by accident. They don't just work hard and keep their head down and with a little bit of luck, crossing their fingers, they end up as these prominent politicians. They're all placed there because they're chosen ones, they're tried and tested, and they can be used to further the agenda. So that will be the case with Trump. It will be the case with Hillary. Many people have made the observation that if Hillary gets in, once again, we have the Clinton family being represented. And really, we've only had two families taking the presidency.
The Bushes and the Clintons.
Yeah, the Bushes and the Clintons, going right the way back to 1980. Ronald Reagan, many people will say that was really George H.W. Bush's presidency. He was calling the shots all through the Reagan years. Then he had a stint at it himself. Then a few years later, it was Boy Bush. In between, it was Bill Clinton. Then you had Obama, but Hillary was behind the scenes there, really. And now it looks like Hillary might get in again. So two families controlling things for, nearly 40 years. What kind of choice is that? No. So I've not been paying attention to the fine detail, Lou, to be honest, so I can't really comment on that.
From what I mean, people are going to be up in arms, and I've been getting a lot of from friends like, Lou, what are you doing? But I'm following what's going on because this is going to affect us, and I could be completely wrong, and I will hold my hands up as I do if I'm wrong. But at the moment, what I'm hearing from Trump, he's making an I'm hoping that if he does win this, he will follow through, bringing back the manufacturing into America, standing by the Constitution, basically, building the wall, a bit like a Brexit. It's going to be bigger than Brexit if he gets in, borders and everything else. So at the moment, I have thrown my lot into Trump's basket. I just hope he doesn't prove me wrong. I hope he is going to be a change. What I'm now going to be very interested in seeing is between now and the next week, what is going to happen to see if to stop the election so Obama wins the third term.
Right.
So this is what I'm on alert that something could very, very much happen within the next week to stop the election.
I mean, this whole political system is just like... Everything is so messed up. It's like applying a sticking plaster to a broken leg and thinking that's going to solve things. It's the same thing that we get in the UK. The Conservatives get in after a few years. They mess things up, and the country's in such a state that everyone says anyone's got to be better than this lot.
Exactly.
Let's vote Labour. They'll fix it. Labour come in first year or so. They seem to be doing a good job, but then their true colours start to show. A few years down the line, people are saying, oh God, Labour are a nightmare, aren't they?
Exactly.
Let's have the Conservatives back, and it bounces back and forth. Same thing in the States with the Democrats and the Republicans, and nothing ever really changes. Everyone, all the politicians, when they're campaigning, they say all the things they think people want to hear. With Obama, it was hope and change and all these slogans that they have, but nothing ever changes. The only thing that's ever going to change is if large numbers of people make a major statement by just not participating in the system, not voting at all.
Start changing themselves.
Well, if 90% of the population stayed at home and didn't bother to go and vote, that would be a very strong message being sent to the controllers that people are seeing through the lies and the BS, and they're not having it anymore. They don't want to participate in any way, and it's time for something different. I would love to see that happen.
I actually, whilst you're here, the Standing Rock and what's going on in America with Standing Rock at the moment, and I want to just put a big thumbs up to Mark Ruffalo, who was in The Last Castle. He was in that Now You See Me. He's a really great actor.
He was in Zodiac.
Zodiac, that's right. He's just delivered solar panels to the guys at Standing Rock to keep them warm through the winter, so they've got some energy out there, protecting the sacred land. So big up there to Mark Ruffalo, and keep strong, you guys, protecting your water and your lands. The indigenous tribes of America just want their fresh water and their land. So fully support that over there.
Yeah,
so what's coming up with you then, Mark? What can you see for the next few months? What's happening? Are you talking? You doing talks?
Well, yeah, myself, I've spent the whole of this year promoting my book, so I've done a whole bunch of conferences and meet-up groups and stuff. And when January rolls around, I'm going to be starting work on the follow-up book. So it's time for Musical Truth 2, because there's a whole load of stories that I couldn't get into the first book. And also there's a whole load of stuff that I now understand and know that I didn't know earlier this year. I've learnt so much. We're learning all the time. And so there needs to be a volume 2 of the book. And the plan is I'm going to spend pretty much all of 2017 writing that book. And I hope to have it ready by early 2018. And then I'm going to be back on the conference circuit and the talk circuit promoting that book. But next year, keeping a bit of a low profile. I just need to get my head down and write this book. So that's going to be happening next year. I am going to the Free Your Mind conference once again in Philadelphia in April. That's always a great event. That's my third year of attending that one. I've got an event coming up in Gothenburg, Sweden later this month, talk event, and I'm doing a conference in Waterford, Ireland in February. I think that's called Awake Minds 2017.
Fantastic.
So that should be a good one.
Well, we used to have a little Truth Juice group going down here, but it's all kind of closed down a bit. But I'll certainly keep my ear to the ground if there's anything happening around here. It's all a little bit quiet, especially as Mr. Crane's up north protecting our wells and stopping the fracking going on.
Right.
So it's all a bit quiet down here at the moment. But
okay, I've got a couple of interesting road trips coming up as well, which I didn't mention. This coming weekend, I'm going up to Scotland, and I'm going to drive all the way up to Loch Ness to take a look at Boleskine House. And this is Aleister Crowley's notorious residence from the early 1900s. And it was bought by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin in 1971. Wow. And he lived there for a time, and he owned it for 20 years because Jimmy Page, like so many musicians, was fascinated by the dark occult teachings of Aleister Crowley. And this place is supposed to have a real brooding, menacing kind of atmosphere about it. And I just feel the need to go and take a look at it for myself. Half of it has burnt to the ground. Last year, very mysteriously, round about the time of the winter solstice, it caught fire. And apparently half of it is in ashes, but the other half remains. So either way, I just want to go and take a look at this place in daylight, not somewhere I fancy being after dark. And then after Free Your Mind in April next year in Philadelphia, I'm going over to Los Angeles just for a very quick trip, and I've got a tour lined up of Laurel Canyon, which is this community that was home to so many of the prominent musicians of the counterculture scene of the mid to late 1960s. So it's the home of the Doors and the Mamas and the Papas and the Byrds and so many other musicians. So I'm looking forward to seeing that place with my own eyes as well.
Brilliant, Mark. Have you got a website that people can have a look at and get in touch with you if they've got any events and talking things they want you to attend?
Absolutely. All my work is at markdevlin.co.uk, and there's more stuff about the book at musicaltruthbook.com. Anyone is welcome to email me. You can find the email address on my main site, and I answer all the emails that I receive. The book is available via Amazon for anyone that wants to get it, or if you want to get the book from me privately, I can send out signed copies. You just got to drop me an email, and we could do it that way. So it's all at markdevlin.co.uk, basically.
Brilliant, Mark. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We will need to do another show because there's so much to cover. So
there sure is.
We'll let you get your head down for a bit, and then maybe get you on in the spring. That would be amazing.
All right, Lou. Many thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for your time, Mark.
Cheers.
Take care, darling. Bye-bye.
Bye.